So let me call our panel to the front. Matt Gwynn is going to lead the panel discussion. Matt's one of our HNI staff. He's also on staff here at ECC. He has a degree in computer science and technology. He helped me with the other events as well. Helen Doolittle, which is the last one coming here. Helen Doolittle, I call it, she's a trained sociologist who studies people and relationships. She was one of our students, and I got to know Helen when we were both reading Brene Brown books. Remember that? So every time I meet Helen, I say, so what are you reading? She likes books, particularly about sociology. Joanna Martin, which is on your far left side, is a graduate of Valley Forge University. She's on staff at Lifeway Church in Lebanon. She's not only a worship pastor and a creative arts director, but she's a real leader of leaders. I've seen her lead other people. And Jacob Ragsdale in the middle has an MDiv from Regent University. He serves and also served with Heidi Baker. I never talked to you about that, but I heard that you were in Mozambique. Okay, well that's enough. That impacted you. He's on pastoral staff at Encounter Church in Quarryville. So can we welcome them? And I'm going to let Matt take it away.
Thank you so much, Barry. Can we give Barry a round of applause as well, please? So I just wanted to clear up one thing, which is that I'm a Gen X. So I'm not older than Gen X. I am actually Gen X. No, that's all right. The generation, there are different dates, but they place Gen X sort of 65 to early 80s, and then Gen Y early 80s into 2000, and then Z 2000 to kind of 2012, 15-ish. And I've never been told this, but I wanted to just highlight that it says that I'm pragmatically wise there, just for the record. Just once being told I'm wise is wonderful. So yeah, my name is Matt. I am a Gen X, and I thought Barry's already done the introductions, but I thought it'd be helpful for each of you to say which generation to begin with you would identify as being part of more strongly than the others. I'll start over with you, Joanna.
Yeah, so I would be considered a millennial.
Great. Which is so millennial or Gen Y are interchangeable?
Yeah, I would also be considered a millennial, although I spend a lot of my time trying to get inside the heads of Gen Z because I work with youth. So,
and that's the same true for you as well, Joanna, correct? Yeah.
Yes.
And likewise, I was born in 93. You can do the math, but a solid millennial.
Great, good, thank you. So we are going to spend a little while asking you questions about the topics that we've been thinking about today. But I wondered if first, whether you have any immediate responses to the teaching that Barry has just given on multi-generational leadership that you'd like to particularly focus on or respond to immediately after his talk. And if not, that's fine. Jacob looks ready. Go.
I'll say one thing. I found your point about family being a part of church culture, being key to intergenerational ministry, to be very insightful. Like even thinking about that admonition to Timothy being in the context of multi-generational leadership, that he points to familial relationships above him and below him as the way to navigate those relationships in a healthy way. I just thought that was a really insightful and helpful point. So I think for me, and I'm sure for all of us, we had a conversation with a number of Gen Z staff and from around the area at Barry's home a few weeks ago that I found very insightful. So a lot of what we'll probably share will come some from that talk as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I just wanted to take a moment to honor what Barry said of that you set out to create a church where young people would have the opportunity to grow and to step out into leadership. And some of my first memories were here at Ephrata Community Church in the youth group, and shout out to Chris Weber in the back, was very much just like, hey, go ahead. You want to lead this? Do it. And he let me start the worship ministry in the youth group. And then he was like, do the Christmas ball. And so there was just so many opportunities for leadership that formed who I was and who I have become as a leader. And it's because of that culture and that environment that you fostered here that allowed me to have very early experiences in leadership, whether or not I knew it at the time. But the statement that I I love about this idea of curiosity, of building a bridge where there may have been a wall. I think that's just so critical for so many, because we need the bridges to walk across, because sometimes I think the younger generation doesn't even know how to get to the other side. They're saying, how do I walk in, what I have the dreams for, or how do I pursue this purpose or this call that's on my life? I don't even know how to get there. And so this idea of curiosity not only bridges generations together, but it also helps bring people on board, because they need a bridge to get there.
Anything you'd like to add, Helen?
It was interesting this past Sunday. I was listening to a sermon, and one was noting that it's well recognized that most of the disciples were likely teenagers, and there may be some historical context with that. I'm not sure, but that was interesting coming into this conversation. If Jesus was looking at the young and looking at the willing heart, and maybe not the most educated yet or equipped, but was willing to walk with them. His model is the best example to go off of. And so if that was his focus and heart, then I think we have a lot to learn in that area.
Great, thank you. So we'll start with some questions that we've prepared, but there are notepads on your tables. If you have any questions that you would like to ask our panel about generational leadership or leading through generational change that we heard from earlier from Dan, then please write those down on your notepad, and then select one representative from your table to ask those questions a little later on. We wanted to do that just so there's a little bit of anonymity of asking those questions, so you don't feel that you don't want to ask your question for whatever reason. So you can just write those down, and then later there'll be a time for us to ask some of those, and I'll run around with the mic again when we do that. But our first question this afternoon is just, what is your experience, really? You touched on it a little bit there, Joanna, but what is your experience of intergenerational ministry? So ministering alongside people from other generations. Are the stereotypes true, would you say? What has been your experience as you've been, maybe even in the workplace or in a church setting, of working with people from other generations? Thanks.
Well, I say I just generally believe stereotypes exist because there is some truth to them. So I wouldn't say that they're completely inaccurate. Just like when I worked for PennDOT over the summer of my senior year, I discovered that some of the PennDOT stereotypes are very true. And it was a little bit shocking and sometimes appalling. But that being said, my experience has been, in my opinion, rather positive. Like I mentioned already, of growing up and having a lot of opportunities for leadership. But now that I'm in a leadership position in a church and having the opportunity to work with younger students, I'm finding the challenge already of thinking, like, are they going to be able to handle that? And are they going to be able to handle, the stress of whatever situation or the conflict that comes or the things. And I know that for myself, it's been cool to watch some of the younger students in the youth ministry, for example, really rise up and say, I want to pursue this. And they are going first in being the ones to volunteer and telling our tech team, I'll program the lights and I'll program the lyrics and I'll do this. And they're just looking for opportunity and really desiring to have opportunity to lead and to further their own desires as well.
Yeah, I would agree with Joanna. I feel like I've also had a very positive experience with intergenerational ministry. I work with Pastor Stewart down at Encounter Church, and I already emphasized the familial aspect. I think that's been a big part of the relationships at our church that have made generational boundaries not feel like they're about competence or about experience exclusively or first, but that there's a value for each person in the culture and the context that's there that leads to open conversation, opportunity. You said, are the stereotypes true? I think, like Joanna said, a lot of the stereotypes are true, but I find that multi-generational conversations are helpful when they encourage humility and questions and listening, but they're unhelpful when they encourage labeling and rigidity. So like it's very frustrating, you know, obviously for millennials, and I think Gen Z even get a worse. Like our generation maybe has felt like most of us are in the workforce now, hopefully, and you know, we've proved our worth to some extent to the older generations. You know, they're like, oh, my millennial guy helped me get set up on my iPhone. You know, like whatever. But it's very frustrating for the younger generations. You know, if there's a label placed, oh, you're just acting like a millennial, you're just acting like a Gen Z right now, and your opinion fits in a category that I can now write off. That's my negative experience with the stereotypes. So yeah.
Yeah, it's good to share both sides of experience as well. So I'll come back to you in a minute as well on that, Joanna, just to get that negative side as well. You don't have to name names. There may be people in the room here, so yeah. But I'll come back to you. What about yourself, Helen? What's your experience been with working alongside other generations?
Yeah, likewise. I've had a very positive experience overall. Interestingly enough, I am working in HR now, so I'm a part of an executive team that meets weekly for our company, and we're run by two mid 60-year-olds, 150, maybe upper 40, and then me. So there's a pretty large gap, and I think that was one of the reasons I was hired into the company, looking at the workplace in the next generation and wanting someone younger that had creative eyes, that was willing to do something different, and looking for me in those areas to be a voice of change. And so I think I've appreciated being in that position where, my voice was valued in that, but I can see in other ways that the business operates that I think I've always felt very respected. That age wasn't a thing, but I do see that I see things differently. And so sometimes that can come into conflict. And then prior to that, I was working in church, shout out to Threshold, for a couple years on staff there. And I feel like, the culture there was very empowering. And you can see the diversity in their staff now too, of the different ages and younger people and staff. And it never felt like I was in any of my opportunities that I was ever minimized for age. But I can see it factor into the way that I see things differently from another generation.
Good, thank you. Joanna, have you managed to think about any less than positive experience you might have had working with other generations? And I'll come back to you on that as well, Helen. Just to get a little bit vulnerable, as you don't have to name names, but it's helpful for every generation to know what they might do that is experienced negatively from a different generation that they might not even be aware of that they are doing.
Well, that's a hard one. I tend to be an optimist, so it's like hard for me to focus on negativity just in general. Stu and I are seeing a therapist right now just for our own marriage and life or whatever, and he's like, you need to be okay with being in tune with the negative side of things sometimes. So this is my attempt at that. All right. One thing that I think I've experienced just being in I pursued music from a very young age, and I'm now a worship pastor. And so one of the hard things that I think we often run into is just people being aware of their own preferences and how that's playing into even their corporate worship experience. And so, having to navigate that for people often feels like trying to bring people along on the tide of the changes both in culture and in music and in all of it that impact our worship experience. And obviously worship is beyond music, but that's often how we refer to it in church. So just come with me for a second. So just the differences in musical preferences have been so varied between generations. And so for me, I have never desired for it to be all young or all old or all whatever on the team. And I do have a good mix. And I would say, though, that the majority are younger. And what I've found working with musicians from, an older generation is more just this unwavering, hold to this is the way that we do things, and very stuck on methods that no longer apply to the younger generation because, as an older generation, they pursued music in a way that the younger generation just simply does not. They don't put the time into practice and to do the things that they need to do to be excellent in their craft and in their skill. And so they can't just follow the drummer without some kind of click or something. Oh, sorry, pen. Without some kind of click or something keeping everyone together. And so it's been a challenge sometimes to navigate to navigate those changes, even at a simple practical level, because the bigger picture of it beyond music is that we all have ways that we've done things for years and years and years, and we like those ways. They work for us. They do what we need them to. But when those ways change because the generation changed, are we willing to adapt and say, you know what? That might have worked when I was this age and it was working great for everyone, but that's no longer the case anymore because we're in a new era. And what does that mean now? And how can I live that out?
Yeah, that's good. I heard someone wise say once, marry your mission, but only date your method. I think it's good.
They must have been Gen X.
Thanks. Helen, have you thought of anything that you would like to share that's maybe less than positive in working with other generations?
Maybe in a little bit of a similar vein. I think millennials and younger people can come in with bright eyes and want to make change and see things differently, and just knowing when to speak and when not to, and also knowing the pace of change. And that, we as humans can only handle so much change at a time. And so, if I'm always the one voicing, why do we do that? Can we look at that? Maybe we should change this. Maybe we should structure this differently. It's not always the proper time. And I think if maybe that can happen too much, then just feeling, maybe not really wanted to speak. So, learning that.
Yeah, that's really helpful and segues very neatly into our next question. One of the things that I've learned is about exactly that, like how often you introduce change. I help on staff here at HarvestNet doing tech and have lots of things that I think could or should be changed. But if I'm trying to do them too quickly, that can be frustrating, at its worst, or overwhelming at its best. And so, yeah, absolutely. That's something really important to learn, is the pace of change, which Dan referred to earlier as well. So thinking about things that we've learnt whilst we've been ministering or working alongside people from other generations, what would you say would be a couple of key things that you've learnt, wisdom that you might want to divest, learning points that you've had whilst working with other generations?
Specifically around change, sorry.
No, not specifically
Just
around
in
change,
general?
but things you've learned about other generations, things you've learned about yourself, things you've learned about how to relate to other generations and how generations maybe work best together. Just anything that we can help the audience here learn from your experience as Gen Ys.
Oh, the one thing that keeps coming back to me after we had a group discussion at Barry's house, and everyone had a lot of great things. Both of these people had a lot of great things to say, and so I hope you say some of them again today. But one thing that someone said, and it has just stuck with me, is that a lot of the younger generation just does not like hierarchy, and I agree with that. We want to feel like a part of the whole. We want to feel like there is the opportunity to approach the leader and that they are approachable and that there's someone that would actually care enough about me to actually have a conversation with me, and not just to have a conversation, but to actually care. I think, growing up, I had a lot of experiences of having a conversation with someone. They say, "How are you?" And this still happens to this day. And you say, "Good." And then you're like, do they really care? Like that question is coming to your mind. Maybe it's just me, but that question is coming to my mind of, does that person who's asking how I am actually care in this moment how I am, or are they just looking for a polite response? And I think that has kind of marked a lot of us of just really questioning, do those in leadership care about us? And what I mean when I say that we don't love hierarchy is we don't want the priest in the robe sitting on the front pews that feel unattainable. What we want, at least in the church context, is we want pastors and leadership who feel like they will come and have a conversation with me, and they care about me, and they love me, and they are championing what God has called in my life and saying, there's more, and I see the more in you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go off of that.
Let that sink in a moment. That's really good. The younger generations definitely, and I say younger, when I say younger, I mean Gen Y and Gen Z, and also Gen Alpha, which are those under 10 or 11, so the children, which is Gen Alpha. They need to know that they feel cared for, that they are seen, that they're known, that they're valued and appreciated and encouraged, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I took a course in college that I just want to say this statement because it was really good. They said, I was taking a course on youth, and they said they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that forever has just stuck with me, especially when I'm working with youth students now, of just like, they don't care what I know right now. What they want to know is, do I care?
It's good. Yeah, so they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Absolutely. Yeah. Helen, sorry I interrupted you.
Yeah, I'll go off of that. And again, I'm currently working in an organizational setting, so lots of my examples are from more of a business mindset. But I was giving a different perspective. But reading a study recently about different companies and looking at the different generations and what millennials and Gen Zers are looking for in a workplace. And before, it used to be loyalty, stability, salary, and now the main thing is, does my company care about my well-being? And so how that transfers in a workplace is, I think, even more in a church setting. But I can say I've learned a lot. And with my current boss, he's mid-60s, great guy, and in my first few weeks there, I went to him with a work conversation and needed some help processing a situation. And he gave me his feedback, but then he turned to me and said, well, what do you think? I want to hear what you have to say, and I want to learn from you. You have a lot of, gifts and talents, and he has so much wisdom and way more experience for me, but for just the humility to him to turn and say that spoke a lot. And we meet weekly, and every week, we chat about different work situations, but then he asked me, how's my personal life doing? He's invested in me. He knows what's going on in my life in different areas. And that's been such a blessing for me. And so I think just going off of that, just the need for, family and community and relationships, I think it's just a craving for this generation for sure.
Yeah, and it seems to me that the younger generations are more keen to have that regular touch point of a weekly check-in as opposed to like a monthly check-in. I don't know if that's something you would agree with.
Yeah, I would say it's more about the sense of openness than, frequency might be important for that, for how it feels, but I think it's more about how it feels to be around the leader or to be around your team. Do I feel like these people, I know this might seem like an overstep, but a word that I've been playing with a lot when it comes to leadership and church is the word friendship. That's an underused word, I think. Teams that, because the obvious exception is, well, you don't need to be friends with everyone you work with, right? Even in church, that might be true. But at the same time, the measure of how much you feel like there's a level of friendship, that doesn't mean over familiarity. But there's a sense of partnership and solidarity, companionship on the journey. That's very important. Yeah. Yeah.
That's
I don't know
good.
if that's helpful. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. Anything else that you've learned that you want to bring out at this point?
Yeah. I think for me personally, I'm continuing to learn. And I think this is a common learning point for young leaders is patience in communication. Is something that I've learned from the older generations, both Gen X and boomers. I've seen that in organizations I led in the past, and then also continuing at Encounter. And I think because our generations long so much for that sense of familiarity, for that sense of friendship, like we're going on the journey together, we're walking, we're with you in this. We want to know how you feel. We want you to be in on the ground level. Like those are all values for us. But there are genuinely times where, sharing too much too soon can cause unmet expectations, can cause it can cause a sense of urgency that's unnecessary, or a sense of frustration that's unnecessary. And I think just seeing seasoned leaders be patient and communicate, just say, hey, let's just hold off on that until we're really sure. That sometimes, that's frustrating for our generation, or at least for me. And I think that I've seen that modeled well at different times.
Good. So learning to be patient and communicate clearly and at the right time. That's good. That's good. So you talked about different opportunities there, or things changing. We've heard earlier about creating opportunities for the younger generation and inviting them into stuff. But this might be a hard question, or maybe one that's hard to talk about. What leadership opportunities do you see that are available for Gen Y, but also for Gen Z? Maybe share a little bit of what some of the Gen Zers would have said at that meeting that we had at Barry's house. What realistically are the opportunities that are available to them? Are there any? Are they appropriate? Are they known by your generation and by Gen Z? Someone brave needs to speak into this.
Well, working in youth ministry, I think one thing that I often see is that they do have a lot more talents there than you think they do. I was actually really grateful. One girl on our youth team, Kennedy, she kept pushing to start youth worship again, and I just had a bunch of negative experiences trying to start it a few years back, and I was like, man, I don't want to do this. That was just the genuine desire, in my heart. Even though the youth worship was a really forming part of my journey, after the experiences that I had trying to start it, I was just like, I don't want to do this. But she just kind of full steam ahead. I said, you know what? You run with this. You do this. Go for it. And you know what? It was successful. And it was not just successful, but now we have 14 students who are involved in it and are growing and learning, and it's giving them opportunities to eventually. I just had one student approach me and say, I think I'm ready to join the worship team that plays on the weekend services. And so they're going through that process now. And even while, I think it's a different generation in the sense that they have a lot of interests and not just one interest. That's at least what I've found, is that they still, when you affirm them and call them up and do that, and actually just give them the freedom to be like, you know what, you think you can do that? Why don't you try it and see how it goes? And just giving them space. We like to say at Lifeway, we have an R&D culture of we research, we develop, and if it doesn't work, throw it out and try again. So giving people space to make mistakes and having space to try things. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And I've watched a lot of young leaders speak. And one thing we've talked about doing, haven't done a lot, but I've heard when our senior nights, we'll always have the seniors come and speak and share a word to the rest of the students. These students do have a lot of wisdom, even though they're so young, which feels so, I think, sometimes opposite, because you're you haven't really lived life yet. But at the same time, I think their childlike faith often is in what they're saying, and we glean a lot from that and learn a lot from just someone being willing to share something. You're that feels naive, but that's probably true and good, and I need to do that. So, just being okay with that part of it.
I think I want to narrow my focus slightly since I'm a pastor, because I think that's a significant category that we're discussing here. I think one of the challenges that I see the church facing right now is how to equip pastors from the younger generations. I feel that there are still those who are going the typical seminary route to feel prepared for ministry. But for those who haven't gone that route and they're wanting to move into ministry, but they're already planted in a local, they're planted in a local church like Encounter or ECC, and they want to move into pastoral ministry, but they don't want to move away for 4 years and get a 120 credit degree somewhere and then come back and we'll see you then. I think there's a real challenge to bridge that gap right now. I think You know, I look at a ministry like YWAM. You know, we send a lot of folks into YWAM. We get a lot of people back. Well, we haven't gotten as many back as we'd like, but we've sent a lot. And we love YWAM. We're big supporters. But, you know, I would say, and this is maybe a personal opinion, there's a lot of folks who are equipped for some level of church leadership, like to direct a program or lead a life group or lead a Bible study or lead a ministry trip, but they're not yet equipped for some of the challenges and experiences that are required for pastoral ministry. I see the ARC network trying to solve some of those problems. I see, you know, the Highlands network trying to solve some of those problems. But I think that's a problem for the charismatic church. We have some anti-academic eddies and currents in our movement. And to overcome that and be able to bring people to that place of being ready for pastoral ministry, I think takes more than just like hey, come hang out with me and you'll be ready to be a pastor. But I'm not sure what that looks like, but I just think it's a problem that needs to be solved. So.
Yeah, that's good. I don't know if this would relate to that, but one of the things that I'm involved with is with university students, actually coaching them through a very short disciple-making movement or microchurch planting 8-week course, which then enables them to then start discipling their network of students within their dorms, within their halls, and so on. And so it's not a kind of, hey, you can go and do this already, although they probably could, but it's actually giving them a little bit of structure, a little bit of definition, a little bit of homework to do to think about the pastoral issues that they may face, or to count the cost, to start with prayer and fasting, and to think about who God is asking them to take that message to. And that opens the door for them to then start doing some of that pastoral stuff straight away as they begin to make disciples, sometimes even before the other students have even come to know Jesus, and they become Christians in the process of being discipled by a disciple maker. So
yeah, I was just gonna say, I think in the specific context of what you're talking about, just leadership within church ministry, is that there is a lot of fear from people to advocate for themselves. Like they're waiting for someone to identify them. They're waiting for someone to say, you have this, pursue it, and don't just like tell them to pursue it, but also say, I'll come alongside you and help you. And I think a lot of that is in this desire for, like, when we're talking about connecting the generations, I don't think it's always that the younger generation doesn't want to listen to the older generation. They just don't know how to approach the older generation. And so they're waiting for the older generation to say, hey, I'm going to approach you instead and say that I see these giftings. And so at least in the friendship circles that I have with those who have made attempts towards, like, I want to do this, it's most often through outlets of, like, I'm going to become a group leader and I'm going to try to host a group and see how that goes. Or I'm going to join the youth ministry and be a small group leader and see how that goes. And they're trying these little outlets, hoping that it will lead to someone identifying the gifts that are inside of them. And don't get me wrong, you will have those go-getters out there, so this doesn't apply to everyone. There are go-getters in this world who will just be like, I don't care, I'm going for it, and whatever. And they do it. But I don't think that's the vast majority. I think the vast majority are those who are waiting to be identified and saying, hey, I see the gift and call of God on your life. And so I guess the question I pose to all of us today is, what would it look like to do that? To begin to look around at the people that God has placed in our sphere and say, what are the gifts and talents and callings? Even tap into the prophetic side that you have inside of you and saying, what are the things that are in them, Lord? And how can I steward that? And how can I help foster that in their life?
That's good. Thank you. I was going to actually ask you that. So how do we do that? But you just said it, which is great. Anything you want to add there, Helen, about opportunities that you see, maybe in the business side for Gen Y, Gen Z, that you see is there or not there?
Yeah. Two things came to my mind. One, in the church side, I know there's two kids ministry directors in the room, but just our mindset of the young and the youth. So I don't know when it starts, whether it's 18 and you can be a leader, whether it's 12 or 10 you can be a leader, but even just shifting our perspective of the young can lead, and we value them and want them to be a part, and want to have a heart for them. And so I think that can just shift a church, whether even just the young, are we valuing them. But as far as opportunities too, I think my heart is, as a church as well, how can we just create discipleship models for people to be invested in, to be poured into, whether they're ever a leader on a church or on staff, or they're just a leader and influencer in their communities and in regions. I think millennials do have like a really big need to have a purpose and a calling in life, and want to feel like, they're successful and they're not, failing at life. That's something that came up a lot in our discussion group. But I do see a lot of people that maybe not everyone's called to be on a staff team. There's maybe 5 people of the staff, but there's a lot of leaders in that church too. And so how to, call people out and grow them as leaders, but maybe not in a position of a staff at that point in their life. So I don't know if that quite answered that question.
Yeah, that's good. It's one thing that I know Barry's and the team are thinking about at HarvestNet, about how we provide on-ramps into those positions. So yeah, it's for the older generations to see the gifts that are there, what you're saying is, and to call those out and to encourage them and to give real opportunity with permission to fail, knowing that actually it's a safe place. If you get it wrong, it's okay. We can learn from that, because actually that is the only way we learn, is through making mistakes. So good. Okay. We're about 2/3 of the way through our pre-prepared question time. So if you haven't yet written down a question for these lovely panelists on your notepad, I want to encourage you to be thinking about that in the next 10 minutes or so that when we get there, there are questions that we can ask them from your tables. So please do be thinking about that as we cover these next couple of points. The last couple of things I have for you are this. What do you see as being keys to success for multiple generations working together effectively for Global Harvest? One of the things, as we heard earlier, that HarvestNet is passionate about is Global Harvest. We've started a prayer watch for that, to pursue the Lord for that. But what does it look like for the generations to work together successfully as we pursue that Global Harvest? Any keys for success that you think you could share?
I'm just going to say it again. I really feel like family, having a familial understanding of our relationships, is so essential, because the alternative is to have a corporate understanding of our relationships, which value people based on their utility, right? You fill this role for me so that we can get here. And then people can kind of feel like a function of the system, you know what I mean? Like I'm a means to an end, and then that's where we begin to label. That's where we begin to defend territory. That's where we begin to compete. It's when we begin to see each other in that framework. So it's like, but in family, there's this sense that everybody's valued, but that doesn't eliminate the relationships of authority that are pre-existing, right? Does that make sense? I just think that's really important, that when we walk as family, I can look up to a leader, even as a millennial, who might be a generation or two above me, and say, I don't think they understand me. I don't think they're getting it. But I can still say, but I value them because that's my dad. Like, you know what I mean? My dad doesn't always get me, but I love my dad. You know what I mean? Or that's my uncle, whoever, Uncle Bobby, and Uncle Bobby doesn't always get it. He's not cool. He doesn't know the slang. He doesn't know what this generation needs, but he's my uncle, and and he cares about what I think because he's my uncle. You know what I'm saying? And I think churches that become overly corporatized for the sake of whatever rewards that might bring, you end up with, often, having been in some larger churches, you end up often with a core in the church as it grows that does feel like family. And then everybody outside of that core feels like they are orbiting the space where real influence happens. Does that make sense? So there's the people who have real influence, whether they're on staff or leading a volunteer team or not, are the people who are woven into that web of familial relationships. But the larger the church gets, the harder it is to expand that area of the church. And there ends up inevitably being large amounts of people who orbit around that network of relationships and can't ever exercise real influence or ever rise to real leadership because there's no familial or friendship link to bring them into real relationship.
Yeah, or family connection.
Yeah.
So how then, what's the key to establishing that, to solving that problem, if you like?
Yeah, I think it's a paradigmatic question. It's how do we view what we're doing? Like, what's our paradigm? Do we see this as, is the function of the church it's a relational, what is the context of our relationship, that how we frame that, and how we frame it to the church, and how we frame it to the staff, and how we frame it to the volunteers, we're going to communicate our paradigm whether we mean to or not. I think most of the time, if we see ourselves as I'm not saying that churches shouldn't have a corporate aspect to them. Just like Barry said, that's necessary. There are resources that need to be exchanged. There are relationships that need to be defined, and that involves corporate processes. But if there's not that familial layer to our relationships, whoever's not in that layer is going to feel isolated from where real influence happens, I think, most of the time.
Yeah.
Again, this is this is opinion stuff here. I don't know. I'm just
that's why we're asking you questions.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and you touched on it at the beginning of what you said there, that it's about love, right? It's about actual love. That should be our paradigm, is love.
Yes.
Right?
That's what separates a church from a corporation.
Right. And I believe that Jesus prayed that actually the world would know that God is real and that he sent his only son to die and rise again for them by the way that we love each other, right? And that's what a family does, or should do, is to love crazy Uncle Bob, or, messy baby Debbie, or whatever it might be. Apologies to any Bobs or Debbies in the room. We're as a family, and so we love each other, whether we're, a baby or a teen or a mum or a granddad or whatever. We love each other, right? Is that what you're saying?
That's right on.
Thanks.
Well, perhaps to further that idea, I guess the bigger question coming to my mind is, what are the on-ramps into your life? And what are the on-ramps into leadership in the place that you serve? And what are the on-ramps for people who are coming to, whether it be your organization or your church, and how can they get involved, and how can they be part of what you're doing and not just a spectator or a floater? And I'll put that aside for a second and go back to the question you actually asked. And I think we already talked about it today, is that you have to be willing to change. In my master's degree, I took this whole course on change because they really wanted me to get this, but they said that if you don't change, you die, period. And I think that's really true. I've just seen it over and over and over again, is that if you are unwilling to change, that eventually the thing that you're stewarding will die. It might be you, it might be a couple people, it might be whatever. Like, eventually there'll be a death to that thing, because you have to be willing to understand that let me be clear, while our mission stays the same to preach the gospel and to make disciples and to do all of that, the ways and the things that we're doing have to change as our culture changes. And if we're going to reach those around us, we have to be willing to adapt with them. I think Paul said, I have become all things to all men. And I've processed that for a while, because I'm like, that feels really sketchy, Paul. Like, all things? Like, really all things? But I think his heart in that was just saying, like, I want to relate to the person in front of me and really get their heart and understand them. And the only way you do that is if you're willing to change and be really have humility, ultimately.
Good. So real love, real change. What can you add to that, Helen? What are the keys?
Yeah, I appreciated what Barry said, read before we lead them. And I was thinking of like old school missionaries, what we sent them to 2 years of language training, and you go to another nation and you're so willing to let go of all your cultural preferences. You know, you'll wear different clothes if that's what it takes. You'll learn a different language if that's what it takes, because you want that people group to know and love God. And I think of that when we're working with different generations. Can we just have the humility to say, hey, are these just cultural differences that we can lay aside to connect, because we have a unity and a passion for God's presence and his kingdom to come in this place? And I think just even unifying over a mission of so desperately being gripped by that love and wanting, God's presence to come. I think sometimes those cultural differences start to be secondary and not primary.
So, real priorities. Yeah.
Can I piggyback off what Helen just said?
Of course.
I think distinguishing between values and preferences is very important. Like you were just saying, like understanding, you know, Barry in a recent HNI summit was talking about, or maybe it was it was about it, what if the move of God that's coming doesn't look anything like the Toronto blessing, right? Would we be okay with that, or would we want to fit it into what we experienced? And I think it's, especially in church, it's so easy to associate preferences with values. Like what I prefer is preferable because I value, like it's just so closely associated with what touches my heart most deeply. And so if we can't make that distinction, then we end up in trouble. We end up dying on hills that aren't worth dying on. Yeah.
Yeah. If we're not open to do the thing that God wants us to be doing for this generation at this time. Right. Good. Okay. We will come to questions soon. So hopefully you've written down some by now, or are thinking about one to write down. And if you haven't, that's your cue to maybe write something down. But there is one last question I had prepped you with, and we've already touched on this quite a bit, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to answer it specifically, just in case you had written anything down that you wanted to say to this. The question is, how can the older generation, so I'll include myself as older than you guys, and then the boomers and those above, how can we, and I generally want to learn, you know, the answer to this, how can we position ourselves and our ministries to best engage, equip, and resource the younger generations? How do we do that? Other than what you've already said, is there anything else that you think would be helpful for us to know about how we can position ourselves to equip you, resource you, engage you in the mission of Jesus to this world?
Well, I think someone, either I or someone else said this at the meeting, but if you look at the life of Jesus, he picked 12 people that literally surrounded him and that he did life with. And I think that we just need to do life with others. If the older generation did life with the younger generation, there's so much that could be learned. And not only that, I think that's when you could actually begin to identify the gifts and call in people's life, because you're actually doing life with them and you're just going to naturally see it. It's going to come out. And you'll be able to identify, okay, maybe I have a Judas on the team and I don't want to put that person in leadership, but at the same time, maybe I also have Peter who I can build my church upon, right? Like there will be out of relationship and just fostering that and being okay with sometimes the uncomfortability of that, because if I'm being 100% blunt, my generation and the generation younger, because of a lot of the social like media and stuff that are out there, sometimes do not know how to communicate very well yet. And to go on that journey with us of like, hey, you know, when we're having a conversation, that's appropriate, that's inappropriate. Like it feels so practical, but we need practical, and we need someone to get in our world and say, this is how you communicate and this is how you live life, and giving direction while also honoring the things that are already good in our strengths as well. I don't know.
Yeah, and what I heard you say at the beginning of that is to identify people and then do life with them. So if you're, you know, looking at a 10-week teaching series, then don't do all of those yourself. Pick 9 other people that could communicate some of those times. Or if you're going on a mission trip to, you know, Timbuktu, then look around you and invite people to come along with you, and then give them the opportunity, not just the opportunity to minister and to communicate, but then also the encouragement and the help and assistance of how to do that, because of social media, you're saying that Gen Z, Gen Y, more so Gen Z maybe, might not know how to do that traditional ministry communication type of platform deal. Is that right?
Yeah, more or less. Just, yeah, working through some of like, in those moments where you feel awkward or whatever, right. Understanding that they feel just as awkward or there's something going on inside of them as well. I've had so many experiences, especially with the younger, like with the youth students, where I'll like interact with them like, they have to hate me. Like, I don't even know what was going on in their mind right there. Like, that was the most uncomfortable situation I've ever put myself in. Fast forward 2 years and they act like we're best friends now. And so it was just taking that initial step to put myself out there into their world and say, I care about you. And the relationship that births out of that is something where you can actually speak into their life.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. There's a cross-culture, like whenever you minister cross-culturally, there's an awkwardness at the start. Like, that's what you're saying, right? And you have to understand, like, when you're ministering intergenerational, you're ministering cross-culturally. And both people are trying to navigate, they both want to build trust, but they're both navigating that awkwardness. That's such a great insight, I think. I think that what Barry did was such a great example. It just blew me away. It was so fun. It was so exciting. It made us all feel so heard. It made us all bond together. And so I think my answer, just to be really brief, would be to create creative spaces that involve younger generations. Not that you have to do everything that they say, but just to create a church that's been rolling for 100 years, like Dan was talking about earlier. The struggle in those churches is that they don't feel that they have the need for creative spaces because they know what they do. But when you create a creative forum where we're not necessarily trying to iron out like the 5-year plan here, we're just trying to gather information and foster relationship, and there's no pressure, there's just opportunity for creative juices to flow. I think that's creating those spaces is awesome. Advisory spaces like that.
That's good.
I agree with what they said.
Good, thanks. Nice. Did you want to add anything, Helen? Okay, good. So we're going to open up the floor to any questions that you might have for these wonderful panelists. So hopefully you've elected someone from your table to be your table's representative and to voice the questions. And if you haven't, then do that now and decide amongst yourselves, or volunteer somebody. Barry just voluntold Cheryl that she would be doing it on the table at the front here. And so I'm going to come around with the microphone, and even if you're a table of one, you can still ask questions, but you have to be your own representative. Sorry about that, Dan. Okay, good. So who would like to go first? We've got Mr. Nyman over here. Pastor Nyman, I should say.
So Joanna, no, I'm just kidding. Actually, I will start. So I have questions for you as a group that I'd like you to answer. So part of it is coming from, well, first let me just say this. I really appreciated everything y'all brought. And I'm actually, I have a tendency to think about legacy a lot. I don't know, it's because I'm 53 and I just do or whatever, and want to identify leaders. And I'm very encouraged by what I'm hearing and seeing and the brilliance of your minds and the thoughtfulness with which you've thought about these things. So good job. Having said that, some of my questions may be a little challenging. Okay, so, but I really meant the first part, so it doesn't take away from that. So Joanna, yes, I'm getting there. So Joanna made a statement from your group about hierarchy and then approachability. And I think the question that comes to mind is authority the problem or a lack of personal care for those under their authority? In other words, if there was hierarchy with very approachable leadership, would hierarchy matter at all, and why?
Off the top of my head, I don't think so. Like, I don't think the issue has ever really been the hierarchy itself. It has been the lack of approachability. But maybe that's just me. Maybe you disagree. I don't know.
Okay, hierarchy saw themselves existing to of necessity be approachable and to help you achieve goals, spirit of servant leadership.
I think maybe it's helpful to define what you mean by hierarchy. So do you mean hierarchy just that there are multiple levels of leadership, some of which that don't touch directly in communication with those below?
I believe that's what Joanna meant.
Sure. Maybe.
Do you know what you meant?
I think I just meant like when people see people in positions of power and that feeling of they're better than I am.
Okay, then so
Yeah.
I would hear you all say that if that wasn't the case. I think you answered that basically through the things you shared. Second question, then Jacob, you brought up about especially pastoral development, escaping the seminarian level type thing. Doesn't mean we don't like seminary. It just means is there a different if there's a different approach, what would it look? I guess my question is I heard a lot, like I think Heidi brought up like children's ministry. You could have a developmental process, a different thing. So I want to focus specifically the question because I think a lot of us who have ministries, we care about exactly what you're talking about, and that is what do you have an age range in mind that you're thinking of that would be in your mind that would help me to know when are they thinking about that, and so how can I then intentionally build targeted on ramps so that they can engage it? That's really what I'm trying to figure out. Any of you can answer that? He just brought it up.
When you say that, do you mean pastoral ministry or do you mean
some kind of pastoral development process so they can get equipped and learn and get mentored and discipled and whatever?
I think that it depends on when they're called to, so a lot of people who feel called to full-time ministry feel a real sense of call to ministry, which can come at any time, right? But I feel like there are I think any time from 17, 16 until early 30s. I think that whole range, there's a prime, there's an investigation of what is my calling, where do I fit? But I think there's a distinguishment. I think it has a lot to do with their position. So like, if they're committed to a church and they're like, these are my people, and you can tell that they have, you can tell that they have the ability to exercise influence and they have things to say that aren't for themselves. Like not a soapbox thing, but you know what I mean? That would be what I'd look for. It's like this person has a message and this person has a relational equity that creates influence wherever they are. I think wherever somebody begins to sense that feeling that they have a message to share and they have the ability to exercise influence, they begin to wonder where that fits. And that can happen, I think, anywhere in those ages. I think it might be, that's maybe my best answer there. I mean,
I'm going to speak from my own personal story.
Yeah.
I was 11 when I started to unintentionally look for like opportunities to step out in the gifts, right? Whether it be in worship ministry or I just wanted to be a part of like personal ministry, like getting to pray for my friends or whatever. But I'd say I intentionally started pursuing it probably around 14 to 16.
Okay, that's helpful. My final, I'm going to short statement and then a question for you on the statement. You said something about you're in a conversation with somebody older. I think Jacob, you said this, and this kind of I can tell they don't get me. I want to I guess the question I want to ask is that as an older person. First off, I've been in your shoes, right? On the other side, older people, we've been the ones who felt misunderstood, right? And now we're on another side looking at us like we don't understand you. But in our mind, we're going, actually, we do understand you. You don't realize that we understand you. And so here's the question. The actual question is this. So I'm going to call it the myth of they don't get me. That was the challenging part of this whole thing that I said I was going to bring up. The myth that they don't get me. But even if I believe it's a myth, right? What would make you feel like, how can I make you feel honored and respected in disagreement as I am saying, look, so can I just, Barry, can I use us for an example? Like Barry's 13 years older than whatever. He's like, Barry's 13 years older than me. I worked on staff, so we're not even a complete generation apart. We're just far enough apart that life experience, right? Because sometimes it's cultural and then there's life experience. So at the life experience level, we'll have a conversation. He's been in ministry longer than me. I'll have this, I think it's a brilliant idea. And I'm an ideas guy, right, Barry? So I'm throwing ideas at him all the time to his chagrin sometimes. And so then he would, I might feel like something got dismissed. I might feel whatever. Or he'll tell me how something should be. And I'm mad. I'm walking away. I'm all mad. I'm sort of gateway. I need to go pray now 3 hours to work through Barry. And so then I'm working through, getting inner healing from heaven. And now I lead a church, and now I go, dang, that guy knew exactly what he was talking about. And so I'm aware that somewhere in your journey, you're going to get the epiphany. You're doing it with your children right now. You're raising kids. At some point, you're going to, you know what, mom and dad might have actually knew what they were talking. Like those moments happen. So when we are in the mom and dad or grandparent generation, how can we speak to the one that God's raising up? That's y'all. Like how do we do it in a way that shows you honor? Because I think honor is a two-way street. And I'm trying to figure out, I think it's on the older generation to demonstrate it if I want to reap it. So how do I sow it in a way that we reap it in the long run and the generations want to work together?
I love this conversation. It's fun. It's fascinating and really helpful. Who wants to take that?
So I'm going to just say something real quick because I was literally in my counseling session and I looked at my counselor and I said this pretty much back to him. I said, so how do you like affirm someone and understand them without having to agree with them? And that, I think, is one of the hardest things, is because often to be understood, we want to be affirmed. And sometimes you just can't affirm someone when they're wrong. Like maybe that idea was wrong and it is naive because we don't have the life experience that someone else has. And, you know, as he's taken us through different exercises, that even when Stuart and I disagree about something, that what makes me feel most understood is when he actually does what he said this morning, is where you actually repeat something back to them, help them know that, hey, I actually did hear what you're saying and I see what you think the result of this will be. And just taking time to acknowledge it and maybe even coach us through it of here's my life experience and what I went through. And I'm not going to say that everyone's going to receive that with humility, because frankly they won't, and some will, some won't. That's just the reality of it. And those who don't receive things with humility often have to learn things the hard way, and to just be okay with that as well, because that's part of it.
Yeah, I would agree that disagreement doesn't mean disunity. I think in even most team decisions, if we actually all wanted to get on the same page, we'd be talking for hours and hours. But just to say, I hear you, I understand where you're coming from, but I'm actually going to go this direction, and this is why. And so I think having clarity and understanding on me, and maybe this is why you disagree, or this is why we're not seeing the same things, but thanks for being respectful and hearing me out. And hopefully I have then enough appreciativeness of your leadership to say, all right, okay, I'm going to yield to that and follow you on this.
Yeah, I think that asking questions is key, and fostering friendship maybe is another place where I'd return to that. Like if I was having conflict with a leader who was older than me and I was feeling like, they don't get me, the classic excuse, right? But if I felt like there was a sense of friendship there, I'd be willing to stick with them in the process instead of becoming rebellious. It's when there's that lack of respect that, you know what I mean? And there's communication styles associated with that respect, but the heart is to bring them along in an invitation instead of hey, here's where we're going. Stephen and I were talking about this in relation to what Dan was sharing earlier, about, sometimes you have to say, hey, that's not where we're going. Hey, this is where we're headed. Thank you for what what you shared. How do you do that without feeling like you're just steamrolling people, and I think it's when you feel like you're trying to sell your viewpoint to them, or there's some manipulative hook in what you're doing, that you lose credibility in that process. So, yeah.
That's good. Thank you, guys. Does that answer your question, Jimmy? Good. Yeah. I think for all of us, no matter what generation we're from, we want to feel valued. We want to feel heard and seen. And so if you can say, yeah, I hear you, I see your idea, and that's a great idea, but actually it doesn't fit this time, or let's try that another time, or okay, actually let's take a risk this time. As long as we feel that we've been heard and it's been thought about, then I think that would help, rather than just being dismissed out of hand. No, my generation won't do that. The end. I've been in that experience myself, where I've just had things just dismissed out of hand, and then I don't feel like I'm even heard or known. So hear us, affirm us, and this works both ways, actually. So this is communication from a younger generation to an older generation, and vice versa. We all want to feel valued and heard and understood, I believe, and loved. Mr. Jim Ehrman.
I saw Jake Cale's hand go up, and I think his question would be better. Every time I hear Jake Cale talked about, everyone always says his first and his last name, like Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Anthony Hopkins, Jake Cale. I just want that noted. Has anyone ever heard him just called Jake? No, it's Jake Cale. So why don't we let Jake ask? But first of all, I just want to say thank you to the three of you. I would not want to be doing that. We just are saying thank you. We deeply appreciate it. Matter of fact, it feels weird to ask you a question because I know two of the three of you and you feel like peers to me. But it appears by the chart that's up there, I am much older than you. And therefore further along in my leadership, supposedly, as that means. But I have an easy, a medium, or a hard question. What are you in the mood for? And it's okay to say easy. You guys been through a lot.
Medium.
Medium.
Go in the middle.
I actually have two medium questions, of which one's a little harder than the other. Medium hard or medium light?
What does the chart say I would do?
That's right, exactly. Yeah, pragmatic
My
wisdom.
retirement is disappearing.
That's right. Okay, this is medium hard. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has the median tenure for a baby boomer at 10 years on the job. For a baby buster, 7 years. For a millennial, 2.8. That makes leadership development delicate. Like, I want to be in your life, but I want to let you know something. I've been abandoned by a lot of millennials. No, I haven't. That's too strong a word. I have started pouring into millennials only to get them to the point where my pouring in somehow spawned their vision. And it felt a mild abandonment.
Same.
So I just want to say, I do not speak that over the whole generation, but help us to know, what would you say to those of us who want to keep being vulnerable in that leadership development cycle, but feel like we might be pouring into something that, because of the hacker lifestyle or the quick fail fast approach, can move on faster than maybe my generation might move on? Does that make sense?
Can I ask a clarifying question?
No, I don't have, no. Jake Cale, can you answer her clarifying question?
When abandoned, did they cut off all communication, or was there still like a open line of?
Oh no, I never felt relationally abandoned, but I felt missionally as if the umbilical ties to their mission weren't necessarily seen as clearly as I saw them. You follow me? Like, umbilical is the wrong word. That does sound like control, doesn't it? You know, the relational ties to their ministry didn't feel as tight as I might have thought they should have been as they were gone. But no, not relationally, no. Not in Christian circles. I've had that happen in some secular nonprofits, but no. Yeah.
Are you saying, like...
This was the medium question. Sorry, Helen.
Just the feeling of once my personal mission, once your mission no longer supports my personal mission, this is going to detach?
That's a version of it. Yeah.
I think that's a weakness of our generation.
Are you asking how do you extend that relationship? Is that your question?
You're all very good at turning questions back.
Let me help. Gen X is a bridging translator, interpreting generation, so I can translate that for you. I think what Jim's saying is, in that scenario, like, well, how do we reduce that scenario? How do we stop that from happening? Because
Or honor it when it does.
yeah, boomers are investing, older generations are investing in younger generations and have done. How do we then continue that investment rather than watching people walk away when they feel like they've had enough investment just because things don't align? Does that make more sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think finding people who have a sense of personal mission already developed and bringing them on to like, there are people out there who have their personal mission already developed and are ready to join you. And if you invite them to join you and explain to them the kind of commitment you're expecting as part of that, then at least there's an integrity piece there that goes along with You know what I mean? Now, if you're starting someone from zero, like they're brand new in the organization and they don't know, they're not developed yet. I think that is a weakness. And I don't know if you can explain the value of investment, but that'd be my first answer.
Yeah, it's very true though. Like in the workplace right now, people don't want full-time 40-hour jobs anymore. They want part-time, remote, work from home, flexible hours,
side hustle.
So yeah, side hustles. So companies are looking, how do we adapt to this? Because we still need a workforce, and this is what people desire now. And so I think it's a good question in church. How do we adapt to that? And some of it maybe is just knowing that might happen a little bit more just with the nature of culture. And so how do we just invest and love people well? And if they're moving on, they're still a part of the kingdom of God, and we're investing internally in that. But then also, I do think it is a growth area of our generation to be able to commit to something long term and maintain that. So I don't quite know that answer.
So I have a thought. My first thought was, when you first said it, was, well, there's a loyalty piece there, right? So like, I'm usually loyal to those that I feel like care about me and I care about them. But I know you well enough to know that you do that and that you do show that familial care for people. I think the second thing that did come to mind is maybe you're just really good at sending people out. And I've witnessed this with a few like key visionary people who are really good at like sewing into people, and maybe I think some of it is setting expectations at the beginning of what the relationship is going to be. Because for me personally, I can't speak for a whole generation because I don't necessarily know. Maybe we have a weakness here, but maybe too, there's this communication piece where it's like, hey, I want to invest in this relationship with the intention to X. Like, what is that X? Like, so when you begin a relationship with someone and are hoping that, maybe they will be your legacy or maybe they will be your prodigy, making that super clear to the person in advance, I think is really important, because otherwise they might just feel like, oh, they're investing in me. Cool. Awesome. All right. Now I have this thing I want to go do. I'm going to go do it. And that part plays a role in it if there's no clear expectations set of like this. I'm not saying you didn't do that, to be clear. I'm just saying that I think I most often see when there is a goal towards something that people will stick it through. But when they're unclear of what the end goal is, that they're often going to go pursue their own goals. Because people with natural leadership abilities are naturally going to have things inside of them as well. And so, is there space for that, I guess?
Is that answer your question? Yeah. I like it when you're happy.
My name is Jake Kale. Jim has just embarrassed me. I am technically a millennial as well. So fellow millennial. There we go. I'm on the bottom end of that. Question came up. It's just a general question. I wasn't even necessarily applying it to specific situations, but toward the end, I'm not sure if it was Jake. It was talking about like creating space for creativity, creating space for ideas. Is that ring a bell? The question just came to my mind, like at what point is it possible when that happens, if those ideas don't get implemented, at what point does it turn into frustration where it's like what if, okay, yeah, we want to hear ideas, we want to get, feedback, but then does it get frustrating when, people share their ideas or their creativity, but maybe it doesn't fit in the timing, maybe it doesn't fit with the vision. And so does it just turn into frustration then? Because it's like, yeah, we hear you, but we're not necessarily, we can't go that way. It was just a question that came to mind. I wasn't even thinking of anything specific, but just a thought.
I say it definitely can. I've witnessed it even in my own realm of like having people bring me ideas and then they get mad I don't do them. And so I guess one thing that I've tried to implement in those circles is personally when I'm having that conversation with them, I preface it with, I want to hear what you have to say. I am not guaranteeing I'm going to do what you say. And that has really helped me personally in that context, because I work with creatives. That's my whole world is creatives. And I think everyone has creativity. But creatives often are innovators, and they push and they push and they push. And in those kind of environments, they're going to naturally, those ideas are going to, like, it, we were saying it was a lot of fun. Like, that was probably the key takeaway that we felt from that, was like, that was a lot of fun. I wasn't expecting, though, for Barry to walk away and do everything that we said. Like that, I just didn't go into it with that expectation. And so I think almost it's like, I feel like I'm reiterating myself again now, but like just this, like, setting expectations for us, or at least for those that we're engaging with, so that they know what the outcome is going to be.
Good. Just before you answer that, Jacob, I will say that we are just after 2:30, so we'll probably take one more question from Dan over here. But yeah, I didn't know if you wanted to say anything. Yeah, fine. Okay, good. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the things that made the conversation with Barry very safe was that it was a conversation about values and not about solutions as much. Like you know what I mean? It was like, hey, what do you care about? What matters to you? It wasn't like, what should we do about this? And then that's where that frustration comes in, I think, where there's that dissonance. But I think on the flip side of that, there's opportunities to, if you do define the question that you're asking very well, then you narrow the scope of ideas that wouldn't fit the problem that you're trying to solve. You know what I'm saying? Like, because like, you know, oh man, I don't want to go long, but there's like, I look at Upper Room, for example, a church that a lot of people are watching out west in Texas right now, and they're doing a lot of awesome stuff. One of the things that's allowed that church to continue doing what they're doing, even though their influence and their size has grown massively, is that their leader keeps driving back what their main value is. He's just bringing them back to their main value all the time. And if people can bring ideas, but always know that it's going to be measured against the values, then they don't feel like, oh, they just don't care about me. They just understand it didn't fit into what we're going for. Yeah.
Good, thank you. Okay, we're going to take one more from Dan. What I will say is, though, if there are questions on your table that haven't been answered, I would really like to collect those, and we could even ask some Gen Ys and some Gen Zs after the fact, and then maybe publish some of those answers in some form at a later date. So please do leave those questions on your table, and I'll go around and pick those up and hopefully be able to read your writing.
Thank you, Matt. This is a big question, but I think it's so important. So this speaks to work culture, but also even just like employment, right? So Helen said, and I have witnessed this, that money and things that are important to Xers and Boomers are not motivators for the younger generations. You care much more about well-being. What does that look like practically when it comes to a leader setting a culture, or even an employer thinking about compensation in the largest sense?
Yeah, I'll speak to the workplace culture. I think that's the easier answer. But you see a lot of workplaces just offering additional benefits outside of just pay. But man, can we have a gym that is accessible for employees? Or we have a life coach on campus that we can offer. Hey, we're having one-on-one mentoring meetings with our employees. That's related to their job, but personal goals. Hey, how do we help you achieve your goals here at employment? So I think I feel like the very similar thing that we've said, but those things that say, hey, we care about you as a person and your development as a person, and we're holistically providing support for that.
Anyone else want to chip in on that?
I guess I would just say, I think to show care is to just really be in someone's life. And to, again, coming back to the accessibility kind of thing that we keep coming back to, is that for a lot of the people, like even in my one-on-ones when I meet with the people that I'm working with, is that one of the first questions I ask them is just, how are you? Like, what's going on in your world right now? and they'll tell me about their life and, you know, what happened that weekend and what the things that they did and those kinds of things, but just creating space to really care. And even, I guess, you know, if you're in a Christian culture, to pray. That's a big one. But even the practical side of it is a lot of like the support people feel when things aren't going well. I think that's even bigger than when things are going well, is like when someone does feel like they're failing, when someone does feel like, what I mean by that is like if they're not meeting expectations, if things aren't going awesome, what does it look like to love them well through that? Of like, hey, you're not doing this well, right? Like you're not meeting expectations, but the idea of servant leadership really being that you're not on your own to figure out how to get there. Like I'm here to help support you and help you understand the necessary steps to success, and whether or not they take those steps is totally up to them. Like that's where ownership happens on their part. But when someone feels alone and feels like they just can't measure up or whatever, I think the loyalty piece starts to dissolve, because to them it's just me against the world versus us against us towards a goal.
That's good. Thank you. Please can we show appreciation for Helen, Jacob, and Joanna?
Yeah, thank you very much. You did an outstanding job.